Well, I'd actually argue that Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind dumbed down a few of the aspects from Elder Scrolls 1 and 2, while obviously improving the vast majority of things. One of the things it brought to the table that none of the previous 4 games had, Arena, Daggerfall, Battlespire, or Redguard, was the construction set. Reportedly having spent a year's worth of man-hours on the construction set, the goal was to allow players to create their own adventures in Morrowind. And to say the modding team took off would be an understatement, whereas Daggerfall would only get a small amount of graphical settings or hacks like Endifall, or save game editors, things like that. Although that's changing now with Daggerfall Unity. We'll talk about that another time. The construction set in Morrowind gave birth to countless other adventures as well as quality of life tweaks for the game. Even before Morrowind was released, back when the construction set was announced, the community began planning all sorts of mods, including the planning stages of adding the rest of Tamriel into Morrowind. This idea would give birth to the Tamriel Rebuilt Project, a project that began on shaky legs. As various creators began divvying up land masses and claims and began working on cities and dungeons, it was becoming apparent doing a project that massive would be a full-time job. To a small community, and to a community large enough to actually pull it off in a decent time frame, quality controls, the ones they were employing, were insufficient. Wildly differing styles and levels of quality were being submitted to Tamriel Rebuilt, and the project, while making quite a bit of content, the project floundered in its beginning years. Eventually, they had to throw a good chunk of the work out and resign themselves to the fact that they'd be working on the rest of Morrowind. Because the vanilla game, Morrowind, its content only included Vardenfell, the island. The Tamriel Rebuilt team, from that point on, dedicated themselves to finishing the rest of the Morrowind province. But the shape and scale and the level of detail they decided to put into it was a massive undertaking. When you include quests and loot and all those things, it was just gigantic, and so they spent years on it. Other projects, like Project Tamriel, have begun work on the other provinces. A sub-project called Skyrim Home of the Nords is working on Skyrim as it was depicted in earlier Morrowind-era lore, as opposed to how Skyrim the game turned it into half American, half Scandinavia bastardized land, as it is now. Every time I mention Tamriel Rebuilt, I get no less than 3 or 4 people telling me how it's never going to be done, how they're sick of waiting for it, they want a complete project now. And I get where you're coming from to a certain degree. However, I rather enjoyed the bite-sized content expansions I've got out of Tamriel Rebuilt, and it's quite nice if you prefer Morrowind to the alternate interpretation such as Elder Scrolls Online. As we've established in other videos, Elder Scrolls Online is not the same genre of video game as the mainline Elder Scrolls series, and therefore they appeal to 2 entirely separate groups of people. Yes, there is some overlap, however, the reasons why you'd like Elder Scrolls Online are radically different from why you would like Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. And a lot of people who like Elder Scrolls Online don't like Morrowind, for good reason. But as I look at the old Ebonheart expansion to Tamriel Rebuilt, and I get ready to discuss that content, Skyrim comes to mind. We've seen the Beyond Skyrim project being worked on for years now. As you know, Skyrim has a much higher level of graphical fidelity than Morrowind, and therefore it requires a much higher amount of development time to create an area that does not break suspension of disbelief on the player's behalf. Compound that on top of the issue of NPCs. Skyrim already creates a barely believable world due to the number of people living in its hamlets and villages that people are somehow calling cities. Skyrim has trained the player that every NPC wants to talk to the player, and every NPC has a life story to tell the player. In order to maintain parity with the vanilla content, a mod maker is now required to fully voice and detail out every NPC in the world. In Morrowind, it would be easy as setting a race, class, background, and perhaps one or two unique topics of discussion. Everything else was filled in by the generic content shared across those profiles. But in Skyrim, every NPC has to be detailed, and that means every mod author has to work extremely hard to create something that has parity with vanilla content. That means any effort to recreate all of Tamriel has gotten a lot harder from Morrowind to Skyrim. Well, Beyond Skyrim has dealt with this problem by creating separate teams for each province or each chunk of landmass. Each team is independently managed. Instead of managing one huge team, there are several teams, each working on their own sections. So you have the Cyrodiil project, a Morrowind project, an Elsewhere project, so on. The Cyrodiil project actually managed to put out that Bruma experience, which is extremely well done and feels like they have literally taken the location from Oblivion and put it into Skyrim in the Skyrim era for our enjoyment. It's lacking some features like the Fighters Guild, which will be in the whole of Cyrodiil when it's done, but Bruma partially suffers from it because that content that would have been there is now reserved for something that will progress across the entirety of the Cyrodiil questline. Despite that, you can see the level of quality they're working with, and it's pretty amazing. So what's going to happen when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out? It's likely years off yet. We've got Starfield in production, and Elder Scrolls 6 is in pre-production, meaning that they're throwing design documents around, possibly hiring and contracting with concept artists. We've got at least 4 years, probably 5 to 8 on the outside, until we see an Elder Scrolls 6. But what happens when it comes out? Well, when Oblivion came out, a good chunk of people moved from Morrowind to Oblivion. And when Skyrim came out, almost all of Oblivion's modding community moved over. Yes, there is 1 or 2 Oblivion projects we can talk about that have been left incomplete for ages, but they're still working on it. You know, it's unfortunate to say the least. All that work has been left in limbo, but that's not uncommon with modding projects. It's a cycle that's repeated itself twice now. Each time, certain groups of people stay behind on the older projects, while other people slowly drop out of the projects due to either time constraints, real life, what have you, or just moving on to the next game. If Daggerfall Unity has proved everything, there'll always be somebody, in Daggerfall Unity's case, 6 to 12 somebodies, working on an older game. But for the most part, everyone moves on to what's relevant. Thankfully, I'm not a news channel, and I'll decide to cover whatever damn topic piques my interest, not giving a damn what the internet deems relevant. But these old projects have trouble recruiting new talent. Garnering interest in a middling project when the internet stops considering relevant is difficult. It's only a matter of time until Elder Scrolls 6 becomes the hot new thing, and Beyond Skyrim, Skywind, and all these major projects are going to have the same issues that Morrowind and Oblivion have dealt with already. Morrowind is thriving despite it, and with 1 or 2 exceptions, Oblivion's dead. 4 years! 5 to 8 at most to get everything squared away, to get something released. That's how long they have. The clock is ticking, and we've seen so many projects slow down and then stop because a new game has come out. Assuming that Elder Scrolls 6 has a proper creation kit and modding, because that'll be a topic for another day. In fact, I've already discussed that a little bit in some of my earlier Creation Club videos. You may want to check those out. Assuming it does have full modding tools on release, it's only a matter of time until the next generation gets the idea to recreate all of Tamriel in the Elder Scrolls 6 engine. And when that happens, will they have a new way of creating all that content that we never thought of? Or will We have legions of part-time volunteers who can't devote the full time and energy to get Tamriel done before the next big thing comes along and steals its relevancy. You see the issue here. I personally think Beyond Skyrim's gonna be alright. I'm anticipating Cyrodiil and the Iliac Bay with bated breath. As for the rest, we'll see in due time, but the clock is ticking. 4 years at minimum, 5 to 8 at maximum, before these projects run into some serious problems. So what do the rest of you think? Do you think Elder Scrolls 6 is going to get the Tamriel Rebuilt and Beyond Skyrim treatment? Do you think history will repeat itself again? Do you think Beyond Skyrim is going to get all of its projects out? I'm seriously rooting for Iliac Bay and the Cyrodiil project. I think that those two are going to get done. But the rest of it, I don't have information on. So I'm just speculating here. The real question is, what's going to happen come Elder Scrolls 6? Only time will tell. Thank y'all for watching. Check the links on screen for more content. Check my main channel page for the social media links. And I'll see y'all next time.